Well, welcome to the very first talk for this Park Cameras Wildlife Day. So I'm in association with Canon, and my name is Felix Belloin, and I'm a wildlife and landscape photographer with a very strange passion for the cold. Today, I'm only going to focus on the wildlife, although we'll see that the landscape plays a big role in my wildlife imagery. But so first, why is it that I like the cold so much? What's the point in me carrying a mountain of equipment and suffering in cold conditions in the hope of seeing an animal I might not even find? Well, for me, it's all about the challenge, and the greater the challenge, the greater the reward. Why do I say it's a challenge? Because it's a heavy physical undertaking, and it requires intense preparation and some specialist knowledge just to keep a minimal amount of comfort out in the field. Why do I say it's a heavy physical challenge? Because all that I need to stay alive out there, I need to carry with me, and that will include the sleeping bag, the tent, sleeping mat number 1, number 2, fuel bottles, the stove, backup stove, the shovel, the change of clothes, and I'm not even talking about the fun stuff, the camera kit. So on average, before even putting the camera kit in, my bag will be anywhere between 40 to 45 kilograms. Now, one of the benefits of doing it in the winter, and some people call me lazy for it, is you are able to use what the Norwegians called a pulk or a sled. And the difference it makes is you're able to, instead of carrying it on your back, you're able to pull the load behind you. And the other benefit is if you have rusty springs, it adds an interesting soundtrack to your holiday. But so how do you train for this? The Norwegians have it all sorted. It's almost a national sport there. Come spring, they all come out of their dens and they go out for walks, pulling some tires behind them. It's a perfectly acceptable thing to do in Norway. It's not acceptable at all in the UK. But that doesn't mean I don't do it, because it really works. And the extra challenge that you don't foresee doing it in the UK is you get subjected to so many questionable puns, such as, oh, you must be really tired today, or that looks tiring.
Is that what you take to the Arctic, 2 tires?
Yeah, it's, I do a photo series of tires in the Arctic. But so I tend to carry all of this equipment up to a predefined location where I believe the wildlife to be, or close-ish, but not so close that I'm detected, and I'll prepare base camp. This can take 1 to 2 hours, depending on the weather conditions. And the crucial thing here is it's really worth investing more time to make it really well, so that every single second you invest in making it is extra comfort for the rest of your trip. And so you've got some important steps. Number 1 is to go with your snowshoes or skis on the area and sort of pack down the snow and make it really flat, so that you're not rolling on your sleeping mat at night, or you don't fall into a snow hole in the morning when you get out the tent. You want to make sure that every single guy rope is properly tensioned to maximize the volume inside the tent. The pegs have to be set way deep, because just because it's not windy now doesn't mean it's not going to get windy. And the last thing you want to do is to have to get out of your sleeping bag at night and do some repair. Pay attention to the direction of the wind, the dominant wind, to make sure you orientate the tent in the right way. And finally, go around the tent and put a layer of snow around the skirt to prevent spindrift, because you don't want to be buried in the snow inside your tent. Once the base camp is finished, usually my pack only consists of the fun stuff, so the camera kit, but also the food and fuel and water for the day, and some basic survival equipment. One of the benefits of doing it in the winter is if you've got sufficient snow cover, you're able to dig inside the vestibule, and that greatly increases the volume inside the tent, and you can almost stand in the tent, which is really useful when you're trying to sort of put a change of clothing or deal with your cameras outside of the blizzard. So a typical day will start around 7, so way before sunrise. I tend to do this in the winter, so it's long nights, and this is potentially my least favorite part of the day, because you're all cozy in your warm cocoon sleeping bag, in your thick wool garment, and then the alarm rings and you know it's time to unzip and brush the ice off the sleeping bag from your own breath condensating on the sleeping bag, and removing the really thick wool to change into something that you would usually find, let's see if I have it here, yes, in the club on a Friday night, which is a fishnet. So I'll get back to it as to why I wear this and why it's important. Once I'm in this layer, I tend to put a really big jacket to keep warm. Then I move to the living quarters, the vestibule, to get ready for breakfast. So breakfast, and actually all the meals, are these frozen dried meals, which 10 years ago were absolutely revolting, but today they're just slightly less revolting. The first couple of meals are always really welcome, but after 10 days it does get old. So breakfast and tea and coffee, and then prep the bags and go out for the hike. So once I'm done with this, I lose every single layer that I have, which isn't the mesh, so top and bottom, and I put another critical piece of equipment, and I've got the same for the legs, which is a shell, and these provide zero insulation whatsoever. The only purpose is to be fully breathable and to protect me from the wind, to avoid any sort of damage to the skin. Because the common misconception with cold weather expeditions and travel is you think, well, if it's going to be super cold, I need to layer up and wear the warmest coat I have, which is true if you're going to be sitting in the snow or static or doing nothing, or waiting for the animal to do something. But if you're going to be carrying a heavy load up loose snow on a hike, it might be -30, you will end up overheating. And so the mesh actually provides the best of both worlds. It traps the heat, but also allows the sweat to escape. And with the combination of the shell, the moisture is evacuated and you keep sort of warm without sweating. Because the compromise is it's better to shiver a little bit for 10 days than to sweat once. Because if you sweat, you get wet and that's game over. Then the hike will take, it's usually 5, 10, 15 kilometers, depending on where I think the wildlife is or where I've spotted it. And it usually happens in the time of day where the light is not great. So it's more of an observation phase. I'll look at the wildlife, see where it's heading. Is it doing anything interesting? Can I see some behavior happening? And I just try and think about where it will be when the light gets interesting or if the weather conditions change. And so I usually end up building my home away from home, which if it's a windy day, I tend to dig a snow hole, which serves three purposes. Keeps me entertained. 2, takes me out of the wind, and 3, keeps me warm. What's very important is to always remember to fill that hole back up, because the last thing you want is for some poor guy to just fall into it in the whiteout. If the conditions allow, and I feel like I deserve a bit of pampering, I might take the time to build myself a snow sofa to enjoy a spot of lunch. So then we wait for the animals to do something. That's when most of the photography happens, between now and sunset. And then after sunset, when the light decreases, we'll start the descent back to the camp. Same principle for the sweat management, so removing all the layers and just being as light as possible. The 2 main differences is, one, after 7 p.m., it's a complete hard stop when it comes to ingesting any food that's been prepared with water, or any drink, because the last thing you want is, once you find any warm and dry in your sleeping bag, 5 hours later to have to go out to do what you have to do. So again, compromise, it's better to be slightly dehydrated than in hypothermia. And 2, because the nights are so long, I allocate much more time in the evening to replenish the water levels. And so if you're familiar with camping stoves, usually they tend to be propane tanks. They don't work in really cold temperatures, so you have to use liquid fuel stoves, which are really efficient, but they have one major drawback, is that they sound like mini jet engines. And so the peace and quiet of the wilderness is often ruined by 3 hours of this. And so I tend to, the only source of water that you find is snow, unless you've got access to glacier ice. And you just continuously melt it and boil it around the clock until you fill up all of your Stanley bottles. So these are really good at keeping the warmth, and even -20, -30, they'll stay close to boiling point throughout the night. And every morning before breakfast, I'll reboil everything, use what I need for breakfast, add some more snow, boil again, and the cycle repeats again. So you might ask yourself, why on earth would you want to be doing this on your holiday? Well, to me, as I said, it's all about the challenge, but the challenge comes with a great reward, and to me is the conditions that you get to photograph the wildlife in. So could be just a beautiful sunny day out in the Arctic with lots of wind. This tends to bring some incredible light conditions with the snow being lifted off the ground, creating these streaks. And that's the type of situation when you want to be taking pictures of wildlife. These are going to get shots that you can't get otherwise. And I'm actually glad that the Canon rep is not with me now, because it's not just the bodies that take a toll, it's also the equipment. It still worked perfectly. It went on many other trips with me. It's just by Canon it works. Right, so this is the logistics. So you've done your base camp, it's all ready to go. You've got you're fueled up, you've got your food, your water, cards are empty, the batteries are full, so what's the next step? This is when it gets interesting. Because I don't know about you, but my excitement tends to be proportional to how unlikely I am to find something. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to try really hard to find what I'm after. And to do this, I'll do lots of research beforehand, either from specialist resources or talking to friends for reported sightings, or even just learning the habits of the animal, what its diet, the type of behavior you might see. And armed with this knowledge and a pair of binoculars, and more importantly, a lot of luck, you might get rewarded with the encounter that you worked so hard for. But that's the goal, so let's not get ahead of ourselves. How do you get there? How do you get close? What can you do to get close to wildlife? Well, there's a lot of things that you can control, and the first one is the way you try and conceal yourself within the environment. And one of the strategies that I employ is different types of camouflage. So, depending on where I'll be in the world, if it's the green pastures of England, it'll tend to be, that type of patterns. So like works really well with grass. If it's Arctic and a mix of rock, I'll have some sort of rock pattern on my lens, and then this to break my human shape. If I'm going to go to Richmond Park, I'm definitely not wearing this, because that would be a similar sort of tire situation. But so the whole idea is you want to break your human shape, because animals are hardwired to identify this, and if they spot something that looks vaguely human, they'll be out of here. But just because you wear camouflage, that's not the end of the story. You also have to use the land to your advantage, use the valleys, the nooks, stay behind rocks, go from tree to tree, or evolve in the shade. There is lots of ways you can sort of make yourself as inconspicuous as possible. But that's what you can control. There's something that you also need to watch out for, but it is not dependent on you. And that is the behavior of the animal. So as you're doing your approach, it's important to monitor how the animals are reacting, because if you see a sudden change in their behavior, that's your cue that you need to stop and wait, because they are suspicious. They can tell something's not quite right. That doesn't mean they've seen you yet, but you might have stepped on something, made a noise, or something is raising the suspicion levels. And it can be as simple as the position of the ears in a mountain hare. I don't know if you've got pets or dogs or cats, you'll see that they'll have different position of ears depending on what mood they're in, and that's a really good indicator as to whether you're doing something wrong or not. So if you manage to use your camouflage, use the land, and make sure that you monitor the wildlife, you might actually get quite close. So here, for instance, with this king penguin, or should I say rather unimpressed king penguin on South Georgia, its distant cousin in Antarctica, the gentoo penguin, or this very surprised-looking reindeer on Svalbard, which you can tell spotted me, but way too late. And then finally, one of my personal favorites, the Arctic fox. So that Arctic fox actually, it was a great learning point for me, because it was one of the first times that I realized one thing that is quite important is that it pays dividend to spend a long time with the same subject, because this was 5 hours into building a relationship with this fox, another 2 white and 1 blue. And when I first moved into their environment, they were acting like you would expect a fox to act when a human gets in. So they were looking straight at me, circling me, ears were in the wrong direction, not way too curious. And so every single picture I was taking, you could tell that they knew I was here. After 5 hours, I just got so boring, they just started doing what they usually do, which is play, stretch, and whatever. And not a sign of care. They were not identifying me as a threat. And I can tell you this for good, because I was taking a picture of this one whilst another one was tugging my boot. And so this is what I strive for, because I want to be witnessing what it is that they do naturally, and I do not want my presence to interfere with their behavior and show on camera. So just because you can get close doesn't mean you have to always go for the close-up shot. And I'm guilty of this. I think social media and the internet is sort of rewarding the in-your-face type of shot because it's immediately accessible, it's impressive, and it's a frame filler. That's the one that's going to grab the attention. But you do lose a bit of the artistry that comes with a well-composed shot. And if you remember what I said in the introduction, whilst I'm not going to talk about landscape, I do use the landscape as a setting for my wildlife a lot, because I go to these places not only to find the animals, but also to find the animals in the place that they call home. And so if I take the example here of this Arctic fox, your only reference point here is it's in the snow, there's blue sky, but you don't know if is it a mountain, am I near the sea, what is it doing, is it alone, are there rocks? All you know is that's the fox, so you can't really relate with what it calls home or what its day-to-day life might be. If you open up the frame, all of a sudden you get a sense of perspective and a sense of place, and so you can sort of identify yourself with what it is that an Arctic fox might go through every day. So that's why I tend to take not only the close-up shots, but also the wide angle. Another example here with a gentoo penguin colony in Antarctica, where it would have been easy to fall into the trap of bringing the big lens and try and nitpick on every single penguin to try and get the best beak position, the right wings or whatever. But then you would miss the bigger picture, which is essentially two species together in the same place. So the penguins and the great skua waiting for a weak penguin to predate on, but also where they are on the planet with this amazing cloud as background. And so it's the interplay of the three elements that make the picture. This is a funny one because if you were to look closely at every single penguin, they're all doing something incredibly weird. So they would not work as individual portraits because when they sleep, they sort of break their neck and put their beaks under their wings to keep warm. But so I would never have been able to take a good picture of any of them. But all of a sudden, add upon the reflection in the mountains for a sense of context, and you get an interesting shot. This one is tainted with a lot of frustration for me because you understand that these places are absolutely vast, so it's quite difficult to find the animal. And the second thing is how easy it is to mistake a rock for a muskox. And the number of times I've woken up in the middle of the night to try and take a sunrise picture of a muskox and approach a beautiful rock, I don't want to talk about it. And so here in quick succession, walrus, nothing wrong with that, but why would you not incorporate that amazing mosaic of broken ice in the frame? That's one of the things I like doing most, is taking my time to approach a subject and waiting for it to be quite comfortable and go through successively wider lenses until I get as close as the animal is going to want me to, and then I get the best of both worlds. So an animal which is big in the frame, but also its setting. And the importance of sense of context is, if I take the example of this really lucky encounter with a snowy owl on Svalbard, they are extremely rare there. I could have gone in close and taken any other picture of a snowy owl, which is probably going to be not as good as the many that people have taken in Canada, but you never ever see them on an iceberg. So it's only special because of where it is, not what it is. And that works with common species as well. So fulmars, we've got fulmars in the UK, really common birds in the Arctic. They circle the ships like pigeons. After a couple of days, you just run out of things to photograph of them until you find something interesting going on in the landscape, like this pancake ice, and all of a sudden, you got the creative juices flowing again. Same here with this ivory gull, which it might be a rare bird. It's pretty dull. It's just a white gull. There's 3 pixels worth of gull here, but that makes the image because it's within that sundog. Walrus on Svalbard. So, lots of people were down on deck taking pictures of like full-face portraits with an amazing light. But to me, the walrus was almost not that important. I liked the contrast with the leading line, and it so happened that it just went into that nook. That, to me, made a much more interesting frame than a close-up shot. And speaking of walrus, if you were to get close to a walrus, you'll notice that on land they're not exactly sightly. It's just like a sort of blob with 2 little tusks. But put them against the background of the majestic Arctic mountains, and all of a sudden you get something quite impressive. And I'll finish with this one, which is one of my personal favorite of this polar bear with the Northern Skjold Glacier, again on Svalbard, which is a huge wall of ice. And what I enjoy about this juxtaposition is, yes, you might be dealing with the largest land predator on the planet, but it's still minuscule compared to what it calls home. And so today we've got great cameras that are able to take the best photographs, but also are great at recording video. And one of the things I do more and more now is, once I have the shots that I'm happy with, is to spend time to record where I am so I can share with people, or even remind myself what it felt like, what it sounded like when I was there. And so I'll just play a few clips here. First one being, and by the way, you're happy that cameras can record sound and image but not smell, because that is pretty... that's 300,000 breeding pairs of king penguins in St. Andrews Bay in South Georgia. And the incredible thing is, all of these little whistles that you hear are individual chicks, which to us sounds like complete chaos, but to a parent penguin is clear as day. They know exactly who's who and where they are. And with penguins, it's always, you smell them, you hear them, then you see them. And at that time of year, they have the amazing down feathers and the rim light early morning. It's like little glow balls all over the place. Smooth transition here to the beach club, with some slightly concerned looking king penguins trying to dodge bus-sized elephant seals on the beach. And so I use also video as a way to add context to shots that I would have taken. Like, for instance, if I take this Arctic fox shot, once I've had the images that I was happy with, I spent some time recording it just to bring it to life so people can sort of connect with the animal more. And I'll do this with every single one of my subjects. So it could be, ptarmigan. So this on Svalbard, we've got them. So this is why, you don't want to get much closer to this than a walrus, because, it's not exactly pretty. More context to that reindeer calf, polar bear. You also get to see, get a bigger sense of scale with the parallax going on, so you understand how big these landscapes are. That's the sort of behind the scenes, if you will, of that walrus shot when it was just swimming around on the channel that we created with the icebreaker. Here's a nook. That's quite funny. When they get caught, they just get their fins together and just hold its position. And here, for anyone who is planning on going to the Arctic or Iceland or somewhere cold, this is your worst enemy. You see that haze? just because it's really cold doesn't mean you don't get it, because all it takes is a slight difference in temperature and it will create that haze. And so you might have the best equipment on the planet. If this happens and you're not close enough, everything's going to be is going to be soft. So before I move on to the second part of the talk, I want to make one point, which is all to do with the way we behave as wildlife photographer in the wild. Because the animals are doing perfectly fine without us, and we should try and keep it that way. The reason why I say this is because photography is getting, specifically wildlife, more and more popular, and the priorities have sort of shifted. And so now you'll see that getting the shot is much more important than the respect for wildlife. And one of the key things is the number of times I see wildlife photographers nailing the approach, getting as close as possible and getting the shot, which is, takes skill. But then as soon as they've got it, it's in the bag, they stand up and just walk away, distressing the animal. And to me, it's the way you exit a scene is just as important as the way you got in. And I'll demonstrate that point using one of our local wildlife here in the UK, so in the Cairngorms, which is the mountain hare. And I want you to pay attention to the timestamps. So that's, if I don't have my binoculars with me, I tend to do this. I take a shot, and then I look at the back of the screen to see if indeed it is what I'm trying to photograph. And so this is my reference frame to say, okay, this is indeed the mountain hare. That's my target. Now I approach. Took me, I don't know, about half an hour or so, 45 minutes to crawl the 100 meters or so between me and the hare until I got the framing that I was happy with and the portrait. So that's the shot guaranteed. But then the important point is it took me just as long to exit and go back. And this to me is success, because I've got the picture I want, and here I have a mountain hare which is just sitting there perfectly happy, and you can tell by the position of the ears. So I didn't disturb it. So my picture is not tainted by my failure to keep it safe. So that's what I've strived for with my wildlife photography. But so that's the end of the extreme part, and I wouldn't blame you if you said, well, you know what, 10 days of frozen dry meals and minus 30 degrees, it's not for me, thank you very much, that was inspiring, but see you later. You don't have to go to these extreme places to have amazing encounters with wildlife. You do have to go there to experience the extremes, but the encounters, you can have them locally. And the UK has been an incredible training ground for me. I've honed so many skills just by shooting in what the UK has to offer. And what I like to do now is just to give you a few examples of the things that I've learned or that I apply to my own photography in these places that I go to that I've learned locally. So the first one is all to do with the approach and the camouflage, because you've paid attention to the talk so far and you've got the right shade of camouflage, and you're trying to use the rocks and the trees, and you're walking in the shade, you try not making any noise, and yet the animal runs away from you. And you're like, what did I do wrong? And the answer here is wind direction. Think about it. If you can pick up the smell of a commuter on the London Tube on a Monday morning, they can get so much information from a single gust of wind. The wind is both your best friend and your worst enemy, depending on which direction it goes. And so I'll use one of my favorite land mammals, or you could argue sea mammals, that we have in the UK to demonstrate that point. So this is a mother otter and her cub on Mull. Spent a couple of hours with them whilst they were playing and attempting to catch fish, unsuccessfully, I have to say. And I know it looks like they were looking in my direction, but they had no clue I was here. Because I know this because, first of all, I was fully camouflaged. The wind was onshore, so blowing towards me. And the following clip, you'll see that they were just doing otter things and not caring at all about my presence. So the sort of little beep sound you heard, that's the mother calling the pup back towards her, and that's one of the cutest sounds you can ever hear in the wild. But so what does this have to do with scent or smell? Well, when you are fully camouflaged and you're downwind, it's easy to forget that you're still carrying in front of you what is essentially a massive piece of shiny black glass, which you might be invisible. This is definitely visible, no matter how much camouflage I put on the lens. And I think after a while, especially if you get close, the animals can get quite suspicious, and that is what definitely happened with that mother otter, which decided to come for a close inspection. So close, in fact, that this is the last shot I was able to take before it went beyond the minimal focusing distance of the lens, so I think probably 3 or 4 meters away from me, and then disappeared under the water. That's when I froze, because I could still see the cub, and I thought, okay, she's just going to reappear maybe in the distance and I can resume my photography. But to my surprise, 1 minute passed and then nothing happened, and I heard a really loud sniff next to my ear, and she had gone all around the rock behind me, positioning herself downwind to see whether or not that rock smelled like a human, which it did, and within seconds they were both gone. So same happens with all sorts of mammals in the UK. So deer, for instance, is an example. Badgers, they can't see anything. I've had like a badger cub walk on my foot because it just couldn't see me. But the parents are a bit more mindful, and if they smell you, they're back into the burrows immediately. The other tip I want to give you is all about the perspective. So I'm often asked what makes a good image versus a great image, and to me is the way you present the world. So we often fall into the trap of trying to represent the world from our own perspective, the human standing upright looking down perspective, but you generally don't create shots that will engage the viewer with the subject. And so you want to be immersing yourself and therefore the viewer into the world that the animal calls home. If that means getting down to eye level. So it could be crawling on the forest floor and collecting ticks for later, or to get close to a badger, or just crouching to get eye level of a fox. That's how you throw the viewer into the world of the animal. And that works with mammals, but also birds. It could be in flight or perched. And again, it could work as a tight shot, like we discussed, or even wide angle. Get in there, immerse yourself into the animal's world, and that's when you get an engaging image for the viewer. The last tip I want to give you, and that's an important one if you are a photographer yourself or thinking about getting a camera, is you need to know your camera in and out. Cameras these days, I understand, are getting unbelievably complicated. You've got endless menus, sub-menus, customizable button, different focusing modes. It's quite overwhelming, and when all you want to be doing really is focusing on your subject, the light, and the composition. But you don't want to be on a trip of a lifetime to discover all of these things for the first time. You want it to be a long-distance memory. All these technicalities needs to be a long-distance memory, so you can only focus on your creative intent. And so what I recommend doing, and I do it myself, is wherever I go on a walk, could be a park, could be to the beach or anything, I will carry my camera with me, and just, even if it's a dull day and there's nothing to photograph, I will point it at things, just to keep the muscle memory going, and so I can know exactly all the layouts. I'm not going to go into a deep dive into settings because the room is already dark and I don't want you to fall asleep. Although if you want to talk about how I set cameras and whatever, I will be at the Canon booth after this talk, so we can see how you want to set up your cameras if you've got one. But I want to focus on one really important aspect, which is technique, and more importantly, long lens technique, because lots of people will reach out to me and say, hey Felix, I'm about to go to Svalbard, or I booked this trip to South Georgia, or I'm going to Kenya for 1 week. Do you think I should rent one of those big bazookas to take with me, because that's going to give me all the images that I want. And whilst it is true that these lenses, this equipment will give you results that you cannot get with other equipment, if it's your first time playing with a really narrow focal length, you're going to have a bad time, because this is how we perceive the world roughly as humans. So 50 mil, which is why you often hear people saying nifty 50 when they talk about the cameras. 700 mil is here, and this one with an extender is about 800, so even narrower than this. And so it's a bit like clay pigeon shooting. If you've never done it and someone says, here, shoot the clay, you'll never manage. You have to be able to get a feel for what it is to point at a target, find it, track it. And so you say, but how do you do this? Because these cost a fortune. They are heavy financial investments, and so you don't really have access to them. But thankfully these days you got, especially with the new mounts, some really affordable options which allow you to get a feel for what it is to aim at such high focal length, so that when you actually go for the trip that you booked and you want to hire something, you have the muscle memory. So rinse and repeat. People say it takes 10,000 hours to get good at something. That's one of those. If I don't practice for a couple of weeks, sometimes it happens if I go on a holiday, I'm rusty and I have to rinse and repeat again to get back into the swing of things. But after a while you will get better, and especially with the autofocus systems these days. If your entire job is to keep the subject in frame, and most of the time the camera will do the heavy lifting and keep track of the subject yourself, and delivery mouse. You might get some shots that 10, 15 years ago were not possible, but with the newer technology are much more common. So yeah, just practice. So that concludes the talk, and it's now time for some questions, if I've got any.